This video article is the second in a mini-series looking at Dan Harmon's Story Circle story model, and in this episode of this mini-series we're going to look at the film Gladiator. Now, before we get started, if you want to get an email with a timestamped overview every time I release a new video, head over to deliberate-practice.com, sign up for my email list. Coming soon for email subscribers only will be the director's cut versions of a course I'm putting together called How to Write Your First Short Story, perfect for beginner writers, people who've only written 2 or 3 stories. There will be a free version of this on YouTube, but all the parts will be put into one long video. There'll be 15 to 20 parts maybe, and that video will be around 3 hours long. But for email subscribers, each part will have its separate page. Each page will have detailed timestamp notes, plus there'll be some implementation suggestions as well on each page. So it'll be really worth your while getting on the list for that when it starts being delivered, which will be reasonably soon. So that being said, let's go and move and look at Gladiator. Now, originally I was going to do some cursory analysis of several movies, basically pick some movies and just summarize the different steps of the story circle. And the first one that I started doing was Gladiator, and it works so well with the story circle that I ended up doing a much more detailed analysis, and I think that will actually be of more interest to you from a storytelling perspective. Just in case you haven't seen the first video yet, I'll link that in the recommended movies, recommended articles section at the back of this video article. But here's the graphic of the story circle. You can see there are 8 points of the story circle: you, need, go, search, find, take, return, change. What's interesting is the kind of the top half of the circle is all about the conscious world and order, and the bottom half is unconscious and disorder, and these different levels are very much echoed metaphorically through the story. For example, at the start of Gladiator, Maximus is at the top of his world, is at the top of a hill. They're fighting the German tribesmen in Germany, and then when he go, and we'll cover this in more detail shortly, when he goes and he's captured by the slavers, he literally goes, it's like a literal descent into the underworld. All the gladiator pits are below ground, and a lot of the action that happens is below ground, and it's very dark. It's very different from those earlier earlier scenes where he's at the top of his game and he's at the top of his world. And I wonder whether Ridley Scott did that echoing unconsciously or consciously. Very interesting. Anyway, these are the points. Let's look at each section of the story circle. So the first one is you, and here we get established that the main character is Maximus. He's a loyal general, he's a devoted husband, devoted to his men, he's a man of honor. He's a character that we have lots of empathy for because he's not like a barbaric soldier. His main dreams are not of fighting and leading Rome to glory, but actually returning home alive to his family. And we have the metaphor, which I believe they added very late in the process, of we see him walking through the field of corn, running his hand through the corn. It's a metaphor that's used throughout the film. And his status quo, he's leading men into battle, he's serving the empire. That's who he is. That's where we are with the story at the start. Point 2 of the circle is need. Now, Marcus Aurelius, who turns up at this battle, asks Maximus to become the protector of Rome and help restore the Republic. So it's like a literal call to adventure. Please help me save Rome from corruption. Marcus Aurelius doesn't trust his son Commodus. Maximus refuses. He says a line of dialogue along the lines of, "I've seen much of the world, I want to see home again." So again, he's reaffirming that kind of person who he is. He's not, even though he's risen to the top of the Roman army and his men obviously love him and will follow him into hell and he fights, that's not what he actually wants to do. So this is a really subtle refusal of the call. And what happens and remember that Dan Harmon adapted Story circle from Joseph Campbell, and normally with refusal of the call there's normally further calls presented, but in this case the murder of Marcus Aurelius forces the issue, and basically gives Maximus no choice, and Commodus says he'll be taking over as emperor, and that leaves Maximus with a deep need for justice, which is for Marcus Aurelius, for Rome as well, and very shortly his family. Third step is go, and Maximus' execution is ordered, and his family are their Commodus gives orders for Maximus's family to be executed. He escapes the execution and races to Spain, which is a little bit dramatic considering the time period of the story. So he's got to get from Germany to Spain, and anyway, he gets there, but he's too late, and his family are tragically murdered. After that, he's captured by slave traders, and the threshold he crosses there, he goes from general to slave, from powerful to powerless, and he also, this is a point of no return. Everything that previously defined him, leading his men, being a commander of the Roman Empire, being a devoted husband and father, wanting to go back to his farm in Spain, has all been stripped away from him and destroyed. And he's literally entering the metaphorical underworld, as I mentioned a couple of slides ago. Point 4 of the story circle is search, and this, for Maximus, the Gladiator school is the road of trials. When he starts, he's fighting very much in an almost berserker style fashion. He's not really looking to defend himself, and he starts off as a loner, but he gradually builds his own mini army of fellow gladiators for the games, and he starts using his military strategy to help them get through the games, and as the games masters are trying to put on more spectacles, they're doing it by pitting teams of gladiators against other teams of gladiators, and he also learns from Proximo, who becomes a mentor, the political side of the game. He said if you win the crowd as a gladiator, you win your freedom, but Proximo's got more going on as well, and amongst all this, he finds a reason to survive, which is revenge and justice. So what's interesting about all of the sections so far is they're all portrayed in a very dramatic fashion. Although this is not an action film as such, there is lots of action in it, and each piece of action drives the story further. So it's really interesting to go and rewatch this and study it from that perspective. Step 5 of the story circle is find, and all roads lead to Rome, and the successes that Proximo's gladiators have had in the provincial games have led to him being summoned to Rome. In the Colosseum, he's forced to reveal his identity to Commodus, and Lucius is there, who is Lucilla's son, and we're left with the question, I don't think it's ever satisfactorily answered, whether Maximus is actually Lucius's father. So we don't know in Gladiator, but we suspect he is. And there's plotting going on in the background, it's kind of like backstory to try and restore the Republic and depose Commodus, and Maximus is a crowd favourite, and Proximo and his influence and Maximus's own strategic brain realise that that's something they can try and leverage. Step 6 of the story circle is take, and here excuse me, Commodus discovers the plot to usurp him and restore the Republic. He kills the conspirators, imprisons Lucilla and Lucius, and he challenges Maximus to single combat. Just before the fight is going to take part, he actually mortally wounds him while he's chained up, and so what Maximus is left with is he must defeat Commodus despite his mortal wound. Return, which is step 7. Maximus is dying, and he successfully kills Commodus, though, in dying, and when he's on the ground he basically says free the gladiators, reinstate the Senate, and his sacrifice helps the restoration of the Republic and the empowerment of the Senate. When Commodus was emperor, the Senate were reduced to paper tigers. Anything they did or said was either to rubber stamp Commodus's decision, or he would engineer it so they would, or he'd just ignore them. And for Maximus in this film, the return is mostly spiritual rather than physical, and we get the shots of the hand going through the wheat field, and we see figures that we assume are his wife and his son waiting, so we know that Maximus has truly passed over and he's in the next life. He's in the fields of Elysium, as he says at the start of the film when he's giving his motivational speech to the troops before they're about to charge the German tribes. So although he doesn't actually get to return to the world, he does get a spiritual return. And then the final step of the story circle is change, and Rome is transformed, the Republic is restored, and Maximus is honoured as a hero of Rome. He wasn't able to become a part of that as a living person, but in giving his life for that cause, he helped bring that all about. And now the journey's complete. He's gone from soldier of Rome to slave to a champion to paying the ultimate price, and his sacrifice helped bring about Rome's freedom and the restoration of the Republic. And that finishes with a tragic but complete story. And so not every story that, and this is a very Hollywood thing, and I sometimes think we need more stories like this, but not every story needs to be complete with a happy ending. So Maximus dies in the story, and obviously that's tragic, but the story feels complete, and we feel like a sense of vindication, and despite his death we feel uplifted, and the story feels like the circle has come all the way around, and it's not been done. His death isn't gratuitous, and in many ways it's perhaps the best conclusion for the story, because were he left to be alive, then there'd be pressure on him to perhaps marry Lucella and become emperor or something like that, which is something that we know from the earlier scenes in the story that he wouldn't want to be. So the death scene actually worked really well in this movie, and even though the character that we followed all the way through the story has died, we still get a sense of success, and the metaphorical scenes with the cornfield let us know, and we're able to leave the story that he's reunited with his wife and family, which is what he wanted. If you remember, right at the start of the film, he's asked what he wanted. He wants to go home to see his family and his farm. So really, really excellent film, great story, and it's kind of the depth of the story. There's lots more resonance that could be drawn out, but it's definitely worth going back over, watching the film and picking out some of the nuances, some of the, like Commodus has his own story circle, and picking out how Commodus's circle work, and he's like a tragic hero in many ways, or an anti-hero. Can't say enough good things about the film. Well acted, brilliantly written, brilliantly shot, perfect story, and great story example for Dan Harmon's story circle. So closing out, in the next part of this series, I'm going to sketch out how the 8 steps of the story circle work with Finding Nemo. And you might think, well, that's a really big change from Gladiator, and in some ways it is, but Finding Nemo's got a really cool structure, because there are 2 characters who have their own story circles. There's Nemo, who is the who is the son, and then there's Marlin, who is the protective father, and they're separated quite early on, and they have their own journeys, and it's really interesting how their journeys parallel each other, and how for each of them what they need counterbalances with what the other needs. So it's a really interesting story to analyze from this perspective. If this kind of content interests you and you're finding cool and helpful with your writing, this is the kind of thing that I'm putting together in a resource called the Writing Vault. You can see the URL in front of you. There will be a link to that URL in the description below this video if you're watching on YouTube, and this resource is aimed at beginner writers, frustrated fiction writers, aspiring writers. The majority of the videos that I create, I think this is 81 or 82, are based on teaching notes that are in the vault. There's plenty in there. Click the link in the description and go and check that out and see if it's something that might be a good fit for you. If you've got any questions on that or on this video, then send me an email, paul@deliberate-practice.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you for watching this video and your time today. I'll close out with some recommended videos from my channel, and I'll catch you next time when we have a detailed analysis of the two separate but intersecting story circles in Finding Nemo.